This is everything we have now, and I think the result is really nice. Like, all of this took me like a day to make, roughly. Hey everyone, Nils here from Dinghy. Welcome back to a new coding how-to. Today we're going to look at a specific design that we're actually making for a customer right now, and that is this here. So we're building a little leaderboard feature for a web app that we're building for a customer. And I thought this was an interesting case to share because this is a straightforward design. I think there's nothing too crazy going on here, but the customer requested specifically to add some more pizzaz to this whole feature and to have some small animations and to make this feel more gamified, like to make this a nice experience when the users come in, see this for the first time, and make them want to interact with this feature. So I thought, since this is a real world example, I wanted to include you in basically 3-4 things. First of all, let's look at this design, how we built this in HTML and CSS. Like, just look at the markup quickly, look at a couple design decisions in CSS. Then let's move on to how we can add some sparkle to the whole design, like the 3 blocks. We're going to start with the header, then with this little details element, and then with something that's just going to be an ordered list in HTML. So we can understand how each of those are built in an actually very straightforward and simple way, but will look nicer. And just so you see what we're going to build, I'm going to pull up the demo that we have already here. So this is what we have right now. And as you can already tell, I went rogue a little bit during implementation. And that is something that just happens to us often here at Dinghy, that we start with the basic design in Figma, and then the creativity is sparked during development. So this is how it looks once it loaded. Let's reload and let's check how it behaves. So we reload, the coin jumps out, there's like little loading bars going on, the numbers count up, and I don't know if you saw that. I'm just gonna make it a little bit bigger, like pay attention to positions 1, 2, 3. The little sparkle icons kind of spin out of their place and a little crown is added to this whole thing. Yeah, let's jump right in. We're gonna get into how this design is basically made in the first place as the first thing. So let's move that over and let's jump into our trusting code editor right here. So let's start here. Let's make this ugly and let's make it pretty together. So let's look at the header section first that makes up this top element here. So we have our text in the league that you're competing in. We have the days remaining in the month because the leagues always reset at the end of the month. So whenever you come in here, we want you to get a quick overview of how far we're progressing in this month's league. And then we have the little coin over here that has a little sum up icon on it. So cool. The way I structured this in HTML is, so as you can see, this is just like a very completely static HTML file. The actual app is being coded up in Next.js, but I wanted to focus on HTML, CSS, like a couple lines of vanilla JavaScript to get things going and not to get lost in Next.js implementation specifics, because I think the point I'm trying to make here is not connected to Next.js. Like, that is just a framework, but the stuff that we're making here is really just native HTML and CSS and an approach to add microinteractions for a better UX. So what I have up here is just a couple icons in SVG. So this is not very interesting. Let's get into the header section here. So we have a little headline that has the sentence, "You're competing in the Gold League." The Gold League is emphasized with the EM tag right here. Then we have the remaining days element. And there's something interesting going on here already. As you can see, there's like 2 data attributes on this. And the actual number that it starts out with on page load is a 0. because we want this to count up to the days remaining in the animation. So we're going to use this data attribute right here to store the day of the month that we're at right now. So the day today. And then we're also going to have a max, because to have these two values is going to be important for the progress bar that is sliding up at the end of it. And we're going to see how that works in CSS and JavaScript in just a minute. Then we have the coin, and so the way that this is made, we can jump into our dev tools right here and just check this out. So what we have here is the whole figure element. So the actual coin is made up in CSS. So this is just a circle with a shadow inset. We're going to look at the code in a second. Only graphic we have in here is this SVG with this icon shape. And the rest of the coin is made up in CSS. And then we just have a simple paragraph for this next update section right here. Cool. So let's jump into the CSS and look at what we're working with over here. Because this is an actual customer project, we do have a couple things that belong to their design system. So if we look at our global CSS, you can see that I'm importing design tokens from their design system. That's called Circuit UI. It's open source if you wanted to also play with it. So I'm importing that here, and I'm in the global CSS. I'm just setting like a couple things, like removing the margin of a bunch of elements. And I'm doing this thing where I set all of the elements to border box. So they just behave a little bit more consistently across browsers. Cool. In our main CSS for this feature, I have a couple custom properties set up at the beginning. Because I'm getting the colors from their design system, I'm using the new color mix function in CSS in here, and I'm going to show you why. So this is the documentation of their design system. And if we go into the theme, and let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm talking about. So if we look at the list of colors, then we can see it's a very long list, but for this purple color, for example, they call it promo. The only variance that they have at the moment here is hovered, pressed, and disabled. And I want a very light version of this promo color to use for the background of this element here. And so since that's not available, what designers did up until the color mix function was released, we went into Figma or whichever design tool have you, pasted the hex code of the color, and then, used the color picker in Figma to get like the new lighter shade that we wanted, then grab the hex code and put it back into our code. As we will see in this demo, there's a couple places where we can use the color mix function to make our lives easier and to have less manual work in there. So what I'm doing here is that I'm taking the promo color and I'm mixing it with 90% transparency. Awesome. So what we get with the promo light is the 10% opaque version of the promo color. And I can set promo to whatever, and it will always be 10% transparency. Awesome. Cool. So moving on, we have a couple keyframe animations that we're gonna get into a little later. Then we have the styles for the actual element. So this video is not going to be super in-depth. Thus, I'm gonna go relatively quickly through the stylings, just pointing out the interesting and modern bits, I would say, that I think might be interesting to look at. So generally, we have a grid layout going on. So if we inspect this element and we look at the grid, so we have a fairly standard grid. This element's here, that's there, and the coin is spanning both rows so that this always works in this layout as it does. Now, we have our first interesting bit to look at, and that is this progress bar that's coming in. So for that, I'm using a pseudo element, the after pseudo element. I'm setting the background color, and I'm also overlaying a gradient just like that. And let's turn this on and see how this works and how it will look, because we're also doing something like a scale and a transition. And so what's the deal here? To understand this, like, let's put that code in now, but it's not going to do anything. For that to work, we need a tiny bit of JavaScript. So in here, we have two things. We have, first of all, we have a little bit of JavaScript that waits until the document is loaded, and then it gets the elements that we want to animate later on. And for this thing, we're gonna look at the count element. The count element is this one right here that we talked about before. So what this function does is, let's just kick it off and see what happens. So this now counts up the number here and also somehow makes this progress bar move. And the way that it does that is, I'm just going to unfold our animate count function here. Please don't get a headache looking at this. This is boilerplate stuff, I think. This is just vanilla JavaScript in this case. But I think if you wanted to use, for example, Framer Motion to count up the numbers, or like any other library, there's a lot of stuff that can be done with an existing library that I just reinvented together with my friend Claude over here, just to have this in vanilla JavaScript. So like, we're even making our own easing function over here, for example. So this is, of course, not necessary at all. The idea here is that we're using the counting from 0 to 17 in this case, and we're setting a custom property onto the whole header element itself. So you can see it here, count progress 56.666%. That is what this function is doing right here. It's setting this custom property right here, which is being calculated based on the counting from 0 to 17. And then I can just use this in this pseudo element, which is scaled down to nothing, so to say. Like, this is, it just has no width at all. And then we're using the scale function to scale this based on the percentage that is stored in this custom property. So I think this is a relatively easy and nice way to interface between JavaScript and CSS. So we can have all of the presentation here, and the JavaScript is just driving the data in, so to say. Awesome. Let's move on. For this remaining indicator, that is this element there, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can see it better. So for the 17, let's look at it again. So as you can see, the days remaining text is jumping a little bit, and it's a super easy thing that I wanted to call out because it's, I think, forgotten most of the times, that there is a property in CSS that's called font variant numeric. And then you can set that to tabular nums. And what that does is that if your font supports it, and many do, then currently, as you can see, the 1, the character of 1, is a little narrower than the 7. And yeah, and so this setting essentially uses the font variant in which all of the numbers have the same width. And because of that, the days remaining text will jump a lot less already. So let's look at it again. No jumping until it goes 2 digits. Then it has to move over. And because of that, another quick shout out to the CH unit. 1 CH is the width of 1 character in your font. And because, as we just heard too, not all of them have the same width, I believe that 1 CH is represented by the width of 0 in your font, but I'm not entirely sure. Like, it's based on 1 character. So by setting the width to 2.5 CH, we're essentially saying, make the box a little wider than 2 characters, which is nice because then this scales with your font size and you don't have to worry about this at all if you make the font bigger. So like, if we, just to illustrate this point, if we were to set the font size to something crazy like that, then as you can see, the element is just scales up perfectly with the font that is inside of it. So let's get rid of this because that's too much. Moving on. So now I wanted to show you a little bit something for the coin. Like there's a couple things in there that I wanted to mention. So first of all, let's maybe look at the color variants. There's something that Kevin Powell on his channel mentioned and many others did as well. And this is a little bit of a paradigm that I wanted to support because I think it's a good idea. What we have here is, let's look at the markup again. This is the coin, right? And this has a class of coin, but it also has a data variant of gold. And so the idea here is we could, of course, also add a class of gold and just have it here and then have a class of silver and bronze just as a class name. But the idea to use a data attribute is, I think, a very good way of communicating that a coin is a coin, all right? It's always going to look the same, but we're implementing variants of it, of which you can only apply one at a time. And that's the beauty of a data attribute. This can only be gold, silver, or bronze once at a time. So, but with the class, we could easily produce the error of adding all classes at the same time, which of course defeats the purpose. So what I'm doing here to get the gold color in there is that I'm just selecting the data attribute, the data variant, setting it to silver or gold, and then I'm updating the custom property, which is called coin color over here. And also notice that I'm using the native CSS nesting syntax, which I love that we have this now because it just makes stuff so much easier. So yeah, as you can see, the coin is now golden and looks a lot nicer. And just, hey, maybe to prove the point, I don't know, let's make this silver and the coin jumps over to be silver. So this is something that can be controlled through some data coming in that sets this attribute over here. Awesome. Now let's look at the icon, which is a little bit too black for my taste. What I did there is that I used the color mix function again. So I'm using the coin color to mix it together with 15% of black. So that we get a nice shade onto this SSumUp icon based on the color that we're using right now. So if, again, we're setting this over maybe to bronze now, you can see that the color of the icon adapts seamlessly without me having to change anything else. The same thing for silver, of course, going back to gold. And so this updates all the time. You could probably also just reduce the opacity in this case, but I just wanted to illustrate where color mix can come in handy for stuff like that. So that is cool. Now we already have this little hover animation going on. But what I really wanted to show you was how this coin jumps out onto the scene the first time it loads. So this little effect here. What we have is an initial and a flip class because I wanted to add a little bit something on top of the initial animation. So in the initial animation, it kind of jumps out from the ground, spins and scales up. Now, if we hover this, I wanted to make this clickable so the coin spins again. Like it doesn't do anything. It's just like a little nice thing to play with. To do that, let's go back into our JavaScript and add a little click event handler, or like actually two event handlers to this element. So let's enable that now. We click on it, we can see like it kind of scales down and just flips, but without jumping into the ground again. So let's look at these event listeners really quick. I have one that's looking for an animation to end. So there's an event that every element fires as soon as an animation in CSS just ended, and you can do something as soon as it did. So what we're doing here is that we're removing both the class of initial and flip as soon as any animation has ended. So we can see it down here. Currently we have coin and graphic, Now, if we click it, it adds the class of flip so that the animation will run. And as soon as it's done, it removes the class again. And that is important because we're defining different keyframe animations for the things that are happening. So let's go up to our keyframe animations and see that we have a spin in, and we have a move in, and we have a flip. And let's see how we're managing all of that stuff. All right. So down here for the coin element with the initial class on it, we want the jump animation so that it jumps out of the ground, right? But we only want that to happen once. So as soon as this is done initially, we're removing the class initial so that this animation will never run again. Now we're removing the initial class because that defines an animation. So it doesn't conflict with the flip animation being defined right here. If we would add just the flip class on top of the initial class, like we could have conflicting animation definitions going on. So with this animation end event listener, we're just making sure that we're always starting with a clean slate. So that's that. And then on click, we just add the flip class, right? We add it, animation ends, flip class gone again. Easy cheesy. Now onto a little bit more of an intricate setup. And that is that we want this coin to have like a little shining gloss effect going on. And that is all of that stuff up here. So let's uncomment this and see what happens. So now we have this little reflecty animation going on, just like that. And so let's look at how that's done. To see what's going on, we have to remove our overflow of clip, and we're gonna have to add like a little border to the element. Yeah, red, why not? So you can see this coming in there. Let's actually also remove the overflow of clip from the entire element. So what's happening here? This whole thing is basically a background image. So we have this element that's like 400% of the width of the coin. And that defines a background image that has 4 color stops, basically, to get these harsh lines that make up this reflection. And see, like if we hover it, it starts the animation again. And we're just taking this element and we're kind of moving it over the scene so that we get these reflection lines coming in. And that's actually all that we're doing. And now to make this look good, we just remove the border, add the overflow of clip back in. We actually don't even need the one on the header element. I just realized. And now just like that, the coin has this nice reflection animation going on. So that's the header element. Let's reload. Oh, now I remember why we actually need the overflow clip on the header element. See, like now we're seeing where it comes from. It's actually also kind of nice, but let's put that back in. Awesome. So we have all of that. And that is very cool. Let's move on to the next interesting bit in here. And that's where we're using the details element to have this little toggle box going on that we saw in the design. Like that is this thing. I'm using the HTML details element. I'm a huge fan of that. I'm so happy that we have it now. Like it's just like all of these accordions made with JavaScript in the past years. Horrible experience, I think, for everyone who tried to make this in an accessible way. I'm glad that we have this now. And so the basic structure for anyone who did not use the details element yet is details is the whole thing. And then the header element, if you will, is stored in the summary. That is what we're seeing right now. And then anything that comes behind the summary, after the summary element, and still inside of the details is the content. So that is this. And currently this already works. Don't have to do anything with JavaScript or whatever. This can open and close. It's just a little harsh this opening of this box can now be animated through very modern CSS. So this is definitely progressive enhancement for browsers that support it already. Let's close down all of that stuff for a second. So let's get to the accordion. So a couple of things to point out here. It's actually super easy to do. The version that we're seeing now, the only thing that we're doing is that for the summary, I'm applying a display of flex and justify content space between, because we have this custom icon over here. So if you don't have a custom icon and you're not setting the display to flex, by the way, this has its own display mode, which comes out of the box with a triangle that will open and close. It's just not very pretty. So if you override the display mode like that, this will, also take away this little triangle over there. And then we have the SVG itself, this little icon here. We're setting a width, we're setting it to be a square, we're reducing opacity a little bit. Now we're rotating it because the default icon state is down. We're also applying a transition for the rotation to be animated. And now on a details element in CSS, you get access to this brackets open property. That's an attribute selector essentially. And the details element will have an attribute of open once you click on it. You can also, by the way, set this open attribute in the markup initially. So you can just go like this and say open. And now this thing will be open once you load it, and you can now close it, which is also a pretty cool feature to know about. So now, but how does the animation work? And so let's uncomment this whole bunch of code. Let's do it one more time. And we can see we're actually missing one bit of code down here. So now this animates in a nice way. So much better than the harsh experience. And now this is a critical thing in CSS that's never been possible, and that is just starting to be made available by the good people on the Chrome team. I think they started this initiative. So first of all, we're checking if you don't have a preference for reduced motion. That is just a nice thing in accessibility land to do. And now what we're saying is, if you want motion, you don't have a preference to reduce the motion, we're going to put in this line, interpolate size, allow keywords. Well, that's pretty cryptic. What we're having here, if it's open, so to say, let's actually move this element up here. So again, we're using the open attribute to then select a special kind of thing that's available on the details element. And that is this pseudo selector for details content. So that's a bit interesting. I think it's fine. Another API that could have been, I guess, is we could have just also had something like that, summary and content, and then this would be an explicit element. But the platform teams decided to not have this, and to be able to select the surrounding element for everything that we're putting here as a content. We can use this : details content. And this is the part that we're animating from, zero height to automatic height. So, and this is the thing that was never possible in CSS before, if you remember. You can never animate with a transition from zero or from anything, from a known value to an unknown value, right? You would always have to have a predefined size to animate to. Otherwise, the browser wouldn't know what to do with the animation. And now, because we're saying this thing here, we now get to do stuff like this. So in the transition, look at the transition. This is becoming fancy now. So we can now put in keywords here that were just not allowed before. And with this line up here, we're allowing new things to come into the transition. So we're preparing the browser to animate stuff that they usually refuse to animate. It's a little bit like a cheat code, to be honest. So content visibility, we're setting that to a duration. Awesome. So, and opacity, and then block size. Both of content visibility and block size were not transitionable before. And for content visibility, because that is either yes or no, we're also adding the allow discrete keyword here to tell it that we are aware that this is usually a yes or no thing and not a something in between thing. But we're explicitly saying we do want you to animate this thing. And because we're doing this, we can now, for open, just say opacity of 1, that's been 0 before, and block size of auto. So we're essentially saying from 0 to auto, please animate that. And it just works. How awesome is that? I mean, that's so awesome. It blows my mind. It's the small things that you needed JavaScript before, and we don't anymore. Yeah, so that's this details element. That's all I wanted to show you for that one. So let's close this down and let's move on to the actual leaderboard section right here. We have 10 places in this leaderboard, and we want to do something nice for positions 1, 2, 3. And we're also showing the points for each of those people on the list. So we want to make it easy to see how much is the difference between the points on position 2 and 3 in relation to all other positions right here. This is one of the things where I diverted from the original design a little bit. Since we have this progress bar up here, when getting into this list, I thought we could also use the progress bar on that one. But let's go one by one. So let's look at the markup for the leaderboard first and foremost. So I'm gonna remove the comment right here. Now, this is an ordinary ordered list. So that we get numbering, and then we have the following stuff in one list item. So maybe let's look at one that is not positioning 1, 2, like off the position 1, 2, 3. Like we can already see that it updated to add these little icons right here. But the general setup is like, this is one item in the list. It has one paragraph element for the nickname, and it has a similar setup for the point value than we saw on the header element with the days. So this is where we're using the same API with the data current and the data max. And as you can see, all elements have the same data max, which happens to be the points of the person on the first position, so that we can have a relation between all of these and the maximum points of whoever is leading the board. With this, let's move into our CSS. So now our list looks like this at the moment. And let's see what we can do to get to the basic design with those nice boxes and those being on 2 lines and all of that stuff in a quick way. So this is the OL element in itself. First of all, we're going to set the list style positioning to inside. That's not going to do anything yet. We're going to leave the overflow clip for later. I'm going to show you that one. And now also, I think a feature that is underrated in CSS is that we can do our own counter increment. So we're basically saying we're making up a new counter for all of the elements. Please count into the leaderboard counter. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So to get our number thing going on, we have this pile of CSS over here. So we're essentially adding a pseudo element inside of each of the leaderboard items. So let's enable that thing, and we can see we have our beautiful numbers coming in. So, and here we now get to see how we use this counter that I've been talking about before. So this is where we're telling it to increment. Like if we didn't do this, then all of the numbers would be 0, as you can see. So we got to tell it, look, count up from 0. And now for the pseudo element content, we can use that counter right here and just display the contents of it. And the rest is just styling. The rest is background color, like making this little box in a square way. Like a lot of that is the same as the days display up here. Now, the next thing that I wanted to show you is how we get those numbers to count up in a similar way as the days remaining up here. And for that, we're going to reuse the same function that we had before that you can definitely replace with libraries, and just go like through all of the individual elements on the list and kick off the animation with a little bit of a timeout so that they start in a staggered way. Okay, let's enable this line right here and see what happens. So now, as you can see, they're starting to count up from the top, and the last one is the last to finish. That is very cool. And what we're also getting from that now, same as with the element above, we get our count progress custom property on each of those elements, which is counting up in an animated way. And so because we have this now, we can add the same progress bar that we saw on the header element up here, can have it and take the percentage to define the width. And so with this in place already, we get a super nice visual way of seeing who has how many points in relation to the other positions in the list. And now the only thing that's missing is to talk about how we did, like, what do we do with these icons over here? So on the first couple positions, on the first one, we have 3 sparkle icons and we have a crown icon. On the second one, we just have 2 sparkles. And on the third one, we just have 1 sparkle. All right. And those are just in the markup. So what we have for the icon is we're positioning all of them in an absolute way. Like we're saying, this is how wide you are, make it a square, opacity, position absolute, and use our promo color again. Now I'm using the nth child selector to distribute them. So if I enable this, we can see, let's zoom in a little bit, that this icon here, the first one, is always on the lower left corner. If it has a second one, it goes here. And if it has a third one, it goes down there. So just to illustrate what I'm saying, if for the third position, I would duplicate this sparkle icon 3 times, then it has the same layout as the first one. But for third place, you only get 1 sparkle. So that's that. Moving on, for the sparkle icons, I actually want to add an animation of spin. And I'm using the same API that I explained before. So I'm telling the icon that this icon specifically is a sparkle icon. So again, here, as with the colors, you can't be of 2 different types at the same time. So I'm not using a class here, but I'm using the data attribute to add our little spin animation. So we have that. And with that, they come scale up and spin in, which is super nice, I think. Now for the crown icon, we just wanted to have like a different color, a different animation, fade in down, and we wanted to sit on this top corner. That's what that code is doing. And so now the only thing missing to make this happen is to add this idea in that we have like a little bit of a different border color going on for each of those items. And now how I'm doing this is that I'm setting an accent color on all of the leaderboard items right over here. So I'm going to comment that one in. This is going to be the accent color from the design system, just mixed with 10% of black, again, to just have it a little bit darker. So now you can see all of the elements have a border. By the way, I'm using a box shadow inset to make this happen in this case. And that is using the accent color right here. So now for the positions 1, 2, and 3, I'm literally just updating custom properties. So let's uncomment the code on each of those and see what we're doing. So the first one gets an accent color of promo, like full scale. This is just going to be purple. Bam, as you can see. The second one is a little bit lighter and the third one is even lighter. And again, we're using the color mix function right here to mix it with more and more transparency. The only other thing that we're setting is the animation delay, which is already included in the spin animation right here. So as soon as we do that and look at the animation again, the sparkles just, third one comes first, second, and then the first one is the one to come in using the animation. And so this is everything we have now. And I think the result is really nice. Like all of this took me like a day to make roughly, but it really does add another layer of interactivity and engagement to the whole feature with, I think, an okay amount of added work that you would have to do on top of the actual layout. All right, perfect. That's it. Thank you for following along. I hope I could point out a couple interesting bits and pieces that you can use in your CSS today, like color mix function, how to apply CSS animations, how to use the animation and event listener, and how to open and close a details element in an animated way. Yeah, let me know what you think and see you on the next one. Bye.